Miss Elizabeth Deas, aged 91, was born on the 23rd of November 1894 in Randolph Street. Her family were Buckhaven fisherfolk, and she has lived for most of her life in Buckhaven. Miss Deas has a vivid memory of what Buckhaven was like as a busy fishing place.
It was well by the time they had begun to sink pits, but it was really a fishing place. And before that, in my father's time, there were over 100 boats of about 50 feet or over left Buckhaven Harbour for the tine herring fishing every year.
The fishing industry, however, had already started its decline by the time Miss Deas was 5 years old. Miss Deas' father was the skipper of a boat called the
Lady Lillian.
After the Lord of Weem's wife, his boat was one of the many that operated from Buckhaven Harbour when the fishing industry was at its height.
In my father's time, well, that would be in the early 1880s and 90s. About that time, there were over 100 boats would leave Buckhaven Harbour. They went away at the beginning of June and came back in September. They came home from September and got their nets ready to go back to Yarmouth. They went to Yarmouth at that time and stayed till after the New Year.
These trips were quite hazardous for the fishermen and their yawls, with the sails and oars, and sometimes whole families were lost at sea. The boats usually had a crew of 7, consisting of the skipper, the mate, and another 5 men.
And the skipper had a fleet of nets. Well, when they came to particants, that was the money. The skipper got his share for his boat, a share for himself too, for his boat, and got his nets. The mate got a share for his nets, and if any of the other crew members had any nets, they got a share for them. But the men who went in the boat who didn't have any share or nets or anything, they were called condamen. That's Candymen. I don't know if I should have said that, but that was the case. They had no substance, you see.
Needless to say, the men without nets or shares got what money was left. In the winter time, the fishermen went out fly fishing in the firth, and they delivered their catch of white fish to the harbour, which was shared out among the cadgers, the men who sold the fish, and the fishwives. Most of the fishwives came from Mountfleurie and some from Buckhyne. They carried the creels of fish on their backs.
Yes, they had creels on their backs. These were the fishwives, creels on their backs. They came from Mountfleurie. They bought the fish when by the lot. Then they would divide them up. They walked up long distances, miles, markets, and different places. They walked and sold their fish to the big houses, the folks who owned farms where they looked the fish to sold them. They were caught that day fresh.
The fishermen's wives also played their part in the industry, repairing and baiting the nets. Their work was long and hard, which they did as well as their domestic work. Miss Deas remembers what the wives did in the summertime while the men were away.
I remember my mother. They were kept busy with the cotton. They had to, it was called the bark. It was the bark of the trees. It was boiled in the cotton to preserve it, and it was dry. It was put out to dry, and after it was dry, it was put in preservative. Again, this bark as we called it, and that went on for weeks and weeks while the men were away at the herring fishing. But nowadays it's a different mode of fishing altogether because they don't need that, they've got their own. The nets don't need mended the same. In fact, it's more trolling now that net fishing.
When the women weren't mending or baiting the lines or doing housework, they were knitting.
If you had any leisure, you were knitting. There weren't ready-mades in those days that there are now. Most of the underclothing was made at home, and the men's jerseys were all knitted at home, and they had what they called hose, long stockings right up here for their sea boots. The sea boots came right up here, you know.
The fisher folk of Buckhaven were a close-knit community, and because their life was hard work, they usually married their own kind. The weddings at the time were not held in church, but in the minister's manse on Friday night. The first church wedding didn't take place until Elizabeth was 25. The reception was held in their own houses.
All the houses weren't big, but they used to be packed with all the relatives that were there, and it would become on you sang, you all sang. They all had their own songs. Come on, you sang. Well, this one was accustomed singing Maybe Rosie Bay, and another one would say, what are all the songs now in the mearns? You know, they all sang, and they didn't need to be dragged on. If you were asked to sing, you just done it without a second asking.
The women also had an outgone, or showing the presents before they were married.
You went to the house and saw the presents, but you didn't sit down. You got a glass of wine and a bit currant loaf or a bit shortbread or cheese.
The presents in those days were a lot plainer than couples would accept nowadays, and mainly consisted of household hardware goods, such as clothes rope, pegs and tea towels. Women who were pregnant were given a lot of support by other women in the community.
A neighbour would have gone in and lifted any clothes taken off the women or the bed and washed them and taken them in without any fuss at all. Nothing said about it, or she would have gone in with soup for the women, for she was in her bed about a fortnight after she'd had a child. You know, they reckoned that the 10th day was the worst day, and although she'd been up for a wee while, she went back to bed for that day. That was a dangerous day, that. Now they're on the street after 2 days.
The women were usually attended by a midwife. The doctor very rarely attended birth.
They'd rather have a woman than a man, you see. Now they didn't go about like they do now. They had to be very particular about what they wore to hide themselves. But nowadays it's different altogether. And to tell the children that they were getting a baby, that was never known. They were supposed to grow in cabbages in the garden.
The fisher folk had a few holidays. Those consisted of mainly parades from Buckhaven, those to the castle in East Weems, where they carried the brightly coloured banners. The fishermen also used to take a break from their summer fishing to come home for the Sunday school trip.